Hello, so today's video is a house overview of the Experimental Perfume Club. So I've been gifted 2 sample sets and also a bottle of fragrance by the brand. So I'm going to mark this video as paid promotion, but I've not been paid to say anything particular or to make this video. So with that out of the way, the Experimental Perfume Club was launched in London back in 2018, and it's the creation of the French perfumer Emmanuelle Moeglin. According to perfume databases, EPC created 22 fragrances to date, and in this video I'm going to be looking at 18 of them. So first off, I'll show you the packaging. So the fragrances all come in sleeves like this one. The packaging feels quite luxurious. I like the fact that it didn't come in any plastic. The packaging outside has a kind of embossed logo, so they have this kind of triangle logo, the EPC, and that's what's all over that. They also have this nice box with the logo on, which you probably can't see on the camera, but there's an embossed triangle there. And then when you open this up, the bottle is inside. So the bottles in the blends collection are in this black format, and I think in the essentials collection they're either clear or they're a tinted colour. So these are a 50ml bottle. They also do sell 10ml travel sizes, and they also sell 100ml refills. The prices for the 10mls I think start from £35, and the 50mls retail for around £125 to £145 each. They also do sell those 100ml refills, which I think retail for around £200. So the fragrance brand also does market a couple of sample sets. So first off, they have the essential sample set, and then they also have the blend sample set. So I'm going to talk about each of these fragrances in turn, but just so that you can see what the sample set looks like. This is the essential sample set. So inside you have 9 times 2.5ml samples, and you also have this little sample card as well to take you through each of the fragrances. But I think it's worth pointing out that each of these samples is 2.5ml, which is really unusual these days. Normally 2ml is the absolute max. Most of the time you're getting 1.5 or even 1.2 nowadays. So this is a really generous sample set, and I really do like that they've thought about this. It closes with a nice magnetic closure, which is unusual. I've not seen that before. So I'm going to start off with the Essentials sample set, because I think the Essentials is really what builds into the blend sample set. So talking about the essential fragrances first will help me to explain the blends to you. But in this first sample set, you can see that the samples are actually colour coded. So initially there are this kind of yellowy greeny colour, and then there's this kind of pinky taupey colour, and then there's this blue colour. And those different colours mean that the fragrances have different intensities. So the green ones are the fresh ones, the taupey colour ones are the mellow fragrances, and then the blue ones are the deeper ones. So let's start off with the fresher fragrances. So the first fragrance is called Bergamot Incense, and this is a soft, silvery, even slightly smoky incense alongside a fresher feeling but still quite light and sparkly bergamot. It's not a sharp citrus, it's more of a softer citrus. I didn't really expect this to feel sort of sparkly, a little bit dainty really from the name, but that's really how this feels in the opening. As this begins to dry down, you get more of an ambery feel. It becomes more powdery, there's some vanilla. It's really less sweet in the dry down as well. But I think if I were to think of another fragrance with this one, they're really not that similar, but I think with that kind of papery, vanilla-y feeling in the dry down, I might think of Vanille des Afriques by Ormond James. That's really the closest one I think of to this, but these still are quite different fragrances. So this is Bergamot Incense. So the next fragrance is called Fig Neroli, and this one just took me straight to a childhood memory. As soon as I sprayed this, I had this childhood memory of eating peas straight off the vine, and that green kind of crunch and the smell of the pea plant is really what I get in the beginning of this fragrance. Of course, in this fragrance, it's probably the fig that I'm smelling there that's giving me that kind of green freshness, and that's probably also part of the neroli here as well, because neroli can be quite green. But yeah, this is a beautiful fresh neroli and just green herbaceous feeling fig. Initially it's quite leafy, but then actually as this progresses it becomes more creamy. There's some orange blossom here too. And there's a bit of a grassy feeling from some vetiver. As this progresses it gets a little warmer, a little more powdery, and even woodier, and even more resinous into the dry down. Eventually it's almost a little bit sweetly smoked, this. I absolutely love the opening of this one, and I wish it stuck around longer, that kind of green herbaceous freshness, because it did just jolt me into that childhood memory. But I thought the Neroli here was really super gentle, and actually with someone who's sometimes struggled with Neroli in the past, I did really enjoy this fragrance. That's Fig and Neroli. So the next fragrance is called Cardamom Moss, and this is the last one of the fresh feeling fragrances. So Cardamom Moss to me comes off as something definitely from the kind of Baccarat Rouge 540 genre of fragrances. It's in that kind of style. So it starts off with a soft, green, cool feeling cardamom. There's also a touch of Evernoil here, just like in Baccarat Rouge 540, so that oak moss kind of chemical. I think there's also definitely some Voltol here and also some Ambroxan, just like Baccarat Rouge 540, so that kind of airy sugariness, that kind of caramel smell of the Voltol, and then also that airiness from the Ambroxan. It's got a sweetness to it. It's almost a sweet mintiness. It makes me think of a mint humbug almost. It's definitely not as minty as something like a mint humbug, but I think that might be an illusion of the cardamom here. As it dries down, it gets warmer, woodier, spicier, even slightly dusty to me. It's definitely less sweet in the dry down, but even in the dry down, you're getting that Evernoil oak moss thing going on, and also that Baccarat Rouge 540 feel. Personally, I don't love Baccarat Rouge 540 style fragrances, so this one isn't for me. I think if you are interested in Baccarat Rouge 540 fragrances, this is quite a nice interpretation because it's different, and I think the cardamom marks it out as different. I think this is not a straight up dupe. It's not as simplistic as that. It's definitely got a bit of a twist to it. So that one is Cardamom Moss. So next is Jasmine Osmanthus, and the brand says this is a tribute to white flowers growing in the desert sand. So this is a sweet yellow floral alongside a clean but quite heady feeling jasmine. It's creamy, sweet and sunny. Very soon the jasmine is overtaken by some frangipani and the whole thing turns more tropical, and it even smells slightly fruity. As it dries down, the frangipani becomes less distinct and it becomes a more textured fragrance. It's almost like the texture of suede. I'm assuming that's the Osmanthus coming in, but it's still got that creaminess. I found this one to be very summery and bright and even sweet, but it wasn't a sugary feeling fragrance. I also like the almost fruity aspect to this as well, and it was quite long lasting. You know, I just always love solar florals, so this one is always going to be a win for me, but I did really like this one. So that one is Jasmine Osmanthus. So next is Rose Rhubarb. So Rose Rhubarb is described by the brand as rose bushes growing from a rhubarb patch, a colourful marriage of opposites. So this is a very rich feeling, almost waxy feeling rhubarb alongside a dark, deep, rich, velvety, red feeling rose. There's perhaps also a bit of an earthy geranium here, but there's also an underlying fruity feel, and I'm assuming that's the blackcurrant leaf. When you think about blackcurrant fruit, you might think of something syrupy, you might think of something tart. I would say here it's more about a bitter waxiness of the leaf. If you think about the sort of slight sheen you get with blackcurrant leaves and that kind of toughness that they have, I think that's really what's been captured in this fragrance. As this dries down, it becomes a little bit aquatic to me. It's pinker, it's brighter. The earthiness is lost, and really the rose is somewhat replaced by peony, and I think that's what's making it feel just a bit pinker. The rhubarb also turns quite jammy. It just feels a little bit lighter in the dry down. In the dry down, it's really a rich feeling but pink fragrance, but there's also this kind of bar soap feel to this. And there's still a bit of a background green waxiness and even a dark fruitiness about it. I have to say with this one, I was thinking of all the rose rhubarb fragrances that I've smelled, which, you know, you would think of Delina, you would think of Nina Ricci, Richie Ricci. This is neither of those two things. This is really quite different. And I think if you were expecting Delina from this fragrance, you would be very, very wrong. I think if you struggle with rhubarb, you might really struggle with this fragrance, at least in the beginning, because the rhubarb is very prominent. But I think this one is really unexpected. It's really long lasting as well. I found this one could be quite strong. But yeah, I think this just does something different with rose and rhubarb to what you might expect. So that's Rose Rhubarb. So next is Tonka Sesame. So the brand described Tonka Sesame as an utterly delectable combination of gourmand notes and woods, fused in perfect harmony. So this opens really quite nutty. It's almond really initially, but with a slightly papery feel to it. It's quite savoury initially, but then after a few moments you get the hazelnut coming in. It's really hazelnuts with their skins on. A few minutes later it's more about the heliotrope. I wouldn't say it's particularly sweet still, but there's definitely an almost cherry aspect to this. In the mid, it's more about a mildly spiced tonka vanilla almond with a very mild cherry twang to it. Considering the name of this, I didn't really get anything that made me think immediately of sesame, but actually in the dry down, the kind of mild marzipan almond kind of smell does smell a little bit toasted, and it's also quite warm feeling, so I guess that could be the kind of effect of the sesame. I really like this one. I really do wish that the hazelnut stuck around longer because I love that aspect of this. That's such an unusual thing to smell in fragrances, and I think this one is going to have a lot of fans because it is very distinctive. It's something that I think is being done more now, but I think nutty fragrances definitely did have a moment a while back, didn't they? And this is a really good example. So that is Tonka Sesame. So next up is Sandalwood Musk. So I totally got this one wrong. When I was imagining in my head what this one might smell like, I did not imagine this fragrance. So this one is definitely something that if you're interested in this one, get a sample because it might surprise you. So this is described by the brand as creamy sandalwood and a hot stone wrapped in soft leather. So this starts with a really gentle spiced sandalwood, but this quickly begins to smell a little bit ozonic to me. It makes me think of the smell of the air before there's going to be a really dramatic electrical storm. It feels a little bit mineralic, but also perhaps even a little bit animalic. It then morphs into ambroxan and vetiver, and it begins to smell slightly sour to me. I think perhaps I'm not the target audience for this one because I tend to really struggle when there's very prominent ambroxan. And I think if you are more of a fan of ambroxan, this one might be more for you. So this one is Sandalwood Musk. So next is Amber Iris, and this one is described by the brand as the essence of a true oriental in this dark but soft fragrance. So this is a warm resinous feeling amber, and the benzoin here is really the most prominent thing. That's what you smell initially. So that kind of warm, powdery, kind of vanillic resin. It's also verging on chocolatey initially, which I assume is the patchouli here, but it's also got a leatheriness, and the vanilla also really begins to pop as the fragrance starts to dry down. The resins here are really prominent, and those give it a really rich and fruity feeling to it. I think the leather here makes me think a little bit of the smell of stables. I guess I've got a kind of association of leathery warmth with stables perhaps, but yeah, that's what I thought of with this fragrance, stables. I think this would be really good in the cold. I think if you like ambers, this might really be a winner. So that one is Amber Iris. So the final fragrance in this first set is called Cedarwood Absinth. So I had no clue what to expect with this fragrance, and I thought this one was really interesting. So the brand described this as a rich, leathery fragrance, unashamedly herbaceous and powerful. So to me, this smells like a really strong, fruity vodka to begin with. It then calms down and you get that very distinctive, slight bitter green feel from the wormwood. But this fragrance also has a warmth to it, just like when you drink absinthe. It's extremely distinctive, and the greenness here never gets too bitter. I get a kind of herbal coolness from this too, and I think this is incredibly clever because it really does make you think of absinthe. The dry down is warmer, woodier, and there's also that kind of almost chocolatey patchouli here again. Later on, this fragrance makes me think more of something like a mojito. It's not exactly the same as a mojito, but there is a slight mintiness to this. And any booziness becomes sweeter. It makes me think more of a rum, but there's also a leatheriness here. I found this one to be really interesting, and I didn't expect to like this one as much as I really do. I think this is something I would want to smell perhaps on somebody else rather than me. I think this is something that I might buy for, a partner, etc. But I do think this one is distinctive, and I haven't smelled anything like this before. So that's Cedarwood Absinth. So if I had to choose my favourites from this set, I would pick out Cedarwood Absinth. I think that's really distinctive and different and interesting. I would also pick out Iris Amber because it just was a very pleasant amber, and some people just want something slightly more safe, but I did really like the resins there. I would also pick out Jasmine Osmanthus. I'm just a solar floral kind of person, and that did have a lovely creaminess to it. But my top favourite would be Tonka Sesame because I just love that nuttiness. It was just really distinctive. So that's from the Essential set. So let's move on to the blends now. So if you look at the blends collection, you can see that there are 6 signature blends and then there are 3 limited blends. So I assume these may at some point have been a limited edition that was made permanent. And I think one of these was made for a particular celebration, but I'll explain that later on in the video. So with the blends, I'm going to put up on the screen which fragrances each fragrance is meant to be a blend of. But this first one is called Velvet Incense. So this fragrance, having tried the 2 fragrances that make it up, I wasn't really expecting any shocks with this one. But actually, this was quite different to how I expected, and quite different to how I expected from the notes. So this has a background hum of a kind of green marine feel throughout the fragrance, which I assume might be the ambroxan here. And I really wasn't expecting to smell that throughout the fragrance, but it is something that I definitely noticed at the beginning and I definitely noticed in the final dry down. So this also opens with a kind of powdery feeling iris. It's more of a texture. There's also here a very fleeting but papery feeling vetiver, and then in the final dry down there's more of a papery feeling vanilla and amber, and there's also some very powdery feeling rich resins here too. Of course, alongside those resins in the final dry down, there's also still that lingering green marine smell. And I think because of that, this one probably isn't for me. But I think if you do like that kind of freshness that ambroxan can bring fragrances, then you might really enjoy this one. So that is Velvet Incense. So the next fragrance is called Sable Gris. So Sable Gris means grey sand. And this one again has quite a big dose of ambroxan. You get that kind of ambroxan sourness in the beginning of this fragrance, alongside a bit of a sparkle from some cardamom. There's also quite a dry woodiness, so perhaps the tobacco and the vetiver, alongside a slight sweetness here. The sweetness is quite odd. It's golden but airy, but I wouldn't say it's as Baccarat Rouge 540 feeling as something like Cardamom Moss. To me, there's that almost green sandalwood smell that you get in fragrances like Santal 33, or perhaps in Gris Chanel. I think it's really that kind of sandalwood that I think of when I smell this fragrance. Again, I'm afraid this one perhaps isn't for me, but I think if you like fragrances like Gris Chanel, if you like fragrances like Santal 33, if you like fragrances like Baccarat Rouge 540, this one might be a winner for you. So that's Sable Gris. So next is Fleur d'Ambre, and this fragrance I think is just very friendly feeling. It's very soft, very gentle feeling combination of those 2 original fragrances. So yeah, I love solar florals, so that's what you get. You get the white solar florals, you get the creamy, sweet frangipani that makes this feel very tropical. And then you also have that kind of sweetness and richness from the resins and the amber. This is just a really smooth feeling fragrance. Again, you have that transition where it goes from the jasmine initially to the frangipani, but I just think this one's very friendly and soft feeling. I think this one is very safe, very easygoing, very likeable. So that's Fleur d'Ambre. So the next fragrance is called Santal Nuit, and again here I get a bit of a mineralic feel, especially in the opening. It's less in the dry down than in the opening, but it's definitely present. This again makes me think a bit of a salty sea breeze, especially in the opening. And really as this begins to dry down, you then get more of the sandalwood. The sandalwood here initially smells a little bit spiced, but there's also a little bit of a greenness here as well to it. I wouldn't say it's as green as in Sable Gris, but it's definitely that Santal 33 style sandalwood. The dry down is that textured, slightly spiced sandalwood alongside a slight leatheriness. I think this fragrance is pretty much seasonless. You could get away with this one all year round. It's very much something that could be a signature fragrance. I think this one isn't for me because of the mineralic aspects, but I think this really does have a little bit of a a modern edge to it. It's very much a modern feeling sandalwood, and I think this would appeal to people who like that kind of almost spiced green sandalwood. So that's Santal Nuit. So next is Ambre Épices, and this fragrance is a gently warm, spiced amber, quite a powdery amber. There's a bit of a dark fruitiness to this, which could be part of the resins here, but there's also, as this dries down, a more powdery feeling vanilla amber. I think if you enjoy spiced ambers, this one is pretty safe. This is definitely a very gentle feeling fragrance. It's something that I think is quite cozy and comforting, but it doesn't have that kind of real deep amberiness that you might expect from a really spicy amber. This is very much more along the lines of a gentle amber. So that's Ambre Épices. So the next fragrance is Tonka Extraordinaire, which is the one that I have the bottle of. And I have to say, I really enjoy this one. So this is definitely a nutty feeling fragrance, and it goes through a few stages at the beginning. So initially it feels quite toasted, and then it goes into more of a hazelnut kind of smell. It then transitions again into something that smells more along the lines of almond, so you think of marzipan almost. It's definitely got a creaminess to this as well, and then as it begins to dry down, it becomes more powdery. And in the dry down, the resins really begin to pop. At points, the creaminess here does make me think of coconut. There's also a chocolatey feeling patchouli. I think if you like gourmands, this is definitely along the lines of a slightly more savoury feeling gourmand. I think if you like gourmands like Théo Carbonell's Oh La La, you might really like this. I don't think they're a similar fragrance at all, but definitely that kind of more savoury feeling gourmand is where this one is going. I think this is slightly more sweet than perhaps Oh La La is, but I think, if you're expecting something super sweet, that's not what you're going to get here. It's a very realistic smelling nuttiness. It's not a sweetness. In the dry down, it's the tonka and the resins that pop, and the tonka really has a nice almondiness to it. But it just has this lovely kind of warmth to it. It just feels very huggy and enveloping and very much like something you'd want to wear, in cold weather, or it's sort of a at-home relaxation, perhaps even going to bed kind of fragrance. It's just very, very comforting. I think I'm someone who really likes extremes with gourmands. I either really like dark, toffee, court sugar kind of smells with gourmands, things that have, a bit of a spicy kick to them, or I really like light, savoury gourmands. And I think this one is definitely in the lighter category. But I think the resins here really add a lot of interest. They give the fragrance a nice duality. You've got the nuttiness on one side, and then you've got this resinous feeling aspect to the fragrance as well, which gives it a lot of interest. I think this is a really distinctive fragrance and well worth sampling this one. So that's Tonka Extraordinaire. So the final three fragrances are called the Edition Blends, and the first of these is called Pistachio Haiku. So I was extremely excited to try this one because clearly it's pistachio, and pistachio is something that I think is really distinctive in fragrances. Again, much like Iris, it's more of a texture to me than an actual smell, but I definitely get that kind of texture and even the smell here as well. So I think this one is really worth trying. So this opens very slightly green alongside that pistachio-like texture, and then with a slight, very slight sweetness. The fig here gives an almost milky green aspect to this fragrance, so it's a fig leaf kind of smell. The fragrance feels cool and shaded, but the pistachio adds a very slight sweetness to this. As it dries down, the pistachio fades and the hazelnut pops up. Initially, I thought this was quite similar to Tonka Extraordinaire, and I ended up smelling these side by side because at this point, in the midpoint to the dry down, this fragrance begins to smell like a sister to Tonka Extraordinaire. It's definitely not the same. There are similarities here because of the hazelnut. And I think really when I smelt them side by side, it was the resins in Tonka Extraordinaire which made it feel quite different. This one's definitely more gentle, and I think this one just feels much more delicate. I think really after the midpoint, the fragrances begin to drift apart again because this one, Pistachio Haiku, turns slightly soapy. It begins to smell a little bit like a bar soap. And I really like that aspect of this fragrance. It's very subtle, but it smells very clean and very creamy feeling, but still with that slight nuttiness. I think this one's really uplifting, really interesting, and still very distinctive. I absolutely love this one. So that's Pistachio Haiku. So the next fragrance is Soleil d'Hiver, and this one really wasn't how I expected it from reading the notes. So this opens with a dry red Moroccan rose. So it is all about the rose to begin with, and really there's a bit of a sparkle initially to the rose, but actually that fades pretty quickly and then you're left with a green feeling sandalwood again. So this fragrance as well later on becomes slightly fruitier, and it makes me think almost of something more crisp like an apple. It's not exactly appley, but there's definitely a slightly fruity feeling later on in the fragrance, which I think might be part of the tea. I don't smell anything that I would describe as tea, but I often struggle to smell tea in fragrances. I get a bit of a woodiness here as well in the dry down, but again, that could be part of the tea. I'm really not sure exactly what I'm smelling here. I think the most distinctive thing here is in the dry down, because an ozonic kind of aspect to this fragrance pops up, which I really wasn't expecting. And that is really what dominates, with the red, fruity, dry rose sort of fading into the background as this goes into the final dry down. I think this one, I can't really think of another fragrance that this makes me think of, and I think it's worth trying if you do like that kind of ozonic feel and if you do like dry red roses. So that's Soleil d'Hiver. So the next fragrance is called Smell Like a King, and this one was launched to celebrate the coronation of King Charles back in 2023. So this opens with a dry, almost minty feeling wormwood. It's cool, icy, silvery but green feeling. This does also have a bit of a mild spice and a woodiness to it, and actually as this begins to dry down, it begins to transition. It gets warmer, sweeter and more textured. It has an airiness to it, and actually as this dries down further it becomes slightly sour, which I think might be the ambroxan. I think the wormwood at the beginning of this is really interesting again, and I really do like that kind of input of Cedarwood Absinth into this fragrance. I think I'm just not a big fan of Cedarwood Moss, and I think that comes in later in the fragrance, so I prefer the opening of this one to the dry down. But I think this fragrance is really distinctive and definitely worth trying if you do like those two other fragrances. If you like those other fragrances in the Essentials blend, then this one has that kind of interesting transition in the middle. So that is Smell Like a King. So from the blends collection, I think my standout favourites here are pretty obvious. There are Tonka Extraordinaire and Pistachio Haiku. I just really like the nuttiness of both of those fragrances, and I think they stand out as different from the other fragrances that I've ended up trying elsewhere in the perfume world. So thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed this video or found it useful, then please do press the like button, and please also consider subscribing if you haven't done already. And please let me know if you tried anything from EPC in the past, or if you own any fragrances from EPC. I'd be really interested in hearing about your thoughts on the brand. And also, if you are interested in trying any of these fragrances, please let me know which ones have piqued your interest. I'd love to know. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.